Have you ever wondered what horrors lay hidden behind the sacred walls of ancient temples, where power and devotion intersected with darkness? Imagine stepping into the world of Sumerian priests, where the line between divine guidance and unfathomable cruelty blurred, and the very air trembled with secrets that could unmake the unprepared. The year is long forgotten, but the shadows remain. Deep within the ziggurats, the priests, revered by all, carried knowledge and authority that extended far, beyond mortal comprehension. They were the custodians of the gods' will, or so it seemed. Yet, what they truly held were instructions for rituals so secretive, so terrifying, that their existence was carefully erased from history's pages, whispered only in fragments passed down by terrified scribes and hidden tablets. The rituals were cloaked in sanctity, rituals designed to bend faith into obedience, fear into control, and devotion into something almost unrecognizable. Initiates, chosen. Children, and even high-ranking temple officials, could find themselves caught in ceremonies where blood, fire, and unspoken laws dictated life and death with chilling precision. And it wasn't only physical suffering. The psychological impact, the manipulation of fear, and the carefully crafted illusions of divine wrath left scars invisible yet permanent. Those who witnessed the rites were sworn to silence, their memories burdened with the weight of forbidden knowledge, their loyalty tested against the backdrop of horrors they could neither comprehend nor escape. The ziggurats themselves became instruments of terror, their shadowed corridors echoing with chants that intertwined prayer and intimidation, creating an environment where disobedience was unthinkable, and questioning the ritual meant courting ruin. These were not stories for the faint of heart. The secrets of Sumerian priests were meticulously kept, passed orally in hushed tones, hidden beneath layers of symbolism, and encoded in glyphs that confounded even the most learned scribes. And now, centuries later, as we attempt to piece together the fragments of what happened, the chilling realization dawns. These were not mere ceremonies. They were carefully orchestrated exercises of power, designed to enforce absolute submission, to instill awe and terror in equal measure. And here is where it becomes personal for us today. Understanding these rituals is more than a lesson in history. It is a window into the mechanisms of human control, the extremes of secret societies, and the ways authority can manipulate belief to devastating effect. You are not just a spectator. You are confronting truths deliberately hidden, truths that challenge the way we understand faith, power, and human nature. Now, I want you to engage. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or feelings about what you've just imagined. Hit the like button to acknowledge the importance of uncovering hidden history, and check if you're already subscribed. Because what you are about to discover next may shatter every assumption you've held about these priests. The shadows are deep, the secrets darker, and the next part of this story will pull you even closer into a world you won't forget. The pact forbidden by the Sumerian priests was not written on clay tablets meant for public knowledge. It was etched in silence, carried in whispered instructions and secret oaths that bound the faithful to acts they could never speak of, without invoking wrath. Behind the grand facades of temples and ziggurats, power was not merely spiritual. It was strategic, precise, and terrifyingly effective. The priests, adorned in ceremonial robes and headdresses that gleamed under torchlight, wielded authority that blurred the line between sacred duty and calculated manipulation. Those who entered the inner sanctums found themselves subject to rules that were both invisible and absolute, a system of obedience so intricate that questioning even a single gesture could invite punishment, social exile, or worse. The rituals themselves were designed to exploit human vulnerability. Initiates were led through labyrinthine corridors, blindfolded, and made to recite prayers whose meanings were deliberately obscured, their minds forced to surrender control to a structure of belief dictated entirely by the priesthood. The air was thick with incense, each scent carefully chosen to stimulate fear, reverence, and heightened suggestibility, creating a sensory environment that left even seasoned devotees on edge. Within this oppressive atmosphere, the priests conducted ceremonies that involved offerings of both symbolic and tangible significance. Animals, grain, and, in the most secretive circles, human participants whose fates were bound to the interpretation of the sacred texts. Every movement, every chant, every ritual action was calibrated to reinforce the hierarchy of power. The priest at the apex, the initiates below, and the laity city-state itself, trembling under the weight of divine authority, interpreted through fear. Beyond the physical rituals, the priests mastered the art of psychological dominance. They orchestrated scenarios where participants' perceptions of time, consequence, and divine approval were warped, ensuring compliance not through overt punishment alone, but through the manipulation of expectation, belief, and shame. To witness a rite was to feel the pulse of a system where spiritual devotion and terror were inseparable, where loyalty was earned not through love of deity, but through conditioned submission, and where knowledge of the inner workings could corrupt or destroy those unprepared to bear it. This clandestine pact was more than a set of rules. It was a mechanism of control that permeated every level of society, allowing the priests to influence leaders, merchants, and ordinary citizens alike, dictating social behavior under the guise of divine will. And yet, even within this framework of control, human unpredictability persisted. Initiates sometimes faltered, questioned, or resisted in ways that forced the priesthood to adapt, revealing a constant tension between absolute authority and the fragile nature of obedience. The lessons embedded in these forbidden practices were stark. Devotion could be engineered, fear could be weaponized, and faith could become a tool of power wielded by those who understood the deepest vulnerabilities of the human psyche. The sum of these practices shows that Sumerian priests were not merely religious leaders. They were masters of influence, architects of ritualized control, whose secret methods shaped the behavior and beliefs of entire populations, leaving a legacy of psychological manipulation and spiritual domination that resonates even in the fragments we uncover today. The sacrifices that no one dared to mention were the darkest manifestation of the Sumerian priests' secret power. These acts were not public spectacles. They were meticulously hidden, performed in chambers far beneath the ziggurats, where only the initiated could enter. Animal sacrifices were routine, yet even these were conducted with precision and ritualistic complexity, designed to instill awe and reinforce obedience. The blood spilled was symbolic, yes, but also practical, each offering a tangible assertion of authority over life itself. A vivid reminder that the divine, as interpreted by the priests, demanded unquestioning submission. Far more disturbing were the human rituals, whispered about in terrified fragments passed down through generations of scribes, erased from formal records yet hinted at in coded inscriptions. Those chosen for participation were not merely volunteers, they were carefully selected according to lineage, social standing, or vulnerability, bound by oaths of silence and loyalty. The process was deliberate. Initiates were blindfolded, bound, and guided through labyrinthine passages lined with icons and statues, meant to evoke both reverence and fear. Each step was a test, every chant a conditioning exercise, and each sacrifice a lesson in the absolute authority wielded by those at the apex of the temple hierarchy. The acts themselves were executed with ceremonial precision, often involving complex sequences of chants, incantations, and symbolic gestures designed to fuse the participants' perception of divine will with the priest's control. Failure or hesitation was punished, not necessarily through death, but through ritual humiliation, physical discomfort, and psychological manipulation so severe that the memory would persist for a lifetime, ensuring compliance and reinforcing the mystique of the priesthood. Even among the highest-ranking officials, whispers of these secret practices inspired both fear and awe, as the knowledge that one misstep could bring unseen consequences created an environment of perpetual tension. These sacrifices, whether of animals or humans, were more than offerings. They were instruments of social and spiritual control, transforming fear into obedience and devotion into submission. The priests understood the power of secrecy. The more hidden the act, the greater its impact on the imagination and conscience of those who learned of it indirectly. Scholars later uncovered fragments of temple records and fragmented tablets that alluded to ceremonies so extreme, so methodically cruel, that they challenged modern understanding of morality, religion, and authority. These rituals were a blend of faith, terror, and strategy, demonstrating that the Sumerian priests were not simply spiritual leaders. They were architects of an invisible empire, one that ruled the hearts, minds, and very bodies of those who came under its shadow. And yet, even within this horrifying calculus, the priests maintained a veneer of divine purpose, convincing initiates and the public alike that the acts were not only necessary but sanctified, a chilling testament to the power of belief manipulated through secrecy, ritual, and fear. The lessons of these hidden sacrifices are stark. When faith is weaponized, obedience becomes absolute, and the line between devotion and terror dissolves entirely, leaving only the unyielding imprint of control in its wake. The secret chamber was unlike anything the uninitiated could imagine. Hidden beneath layers of stone and brick, accessible only through concealed stairways and narrow tunnels, it was here that the Sumerian priests conducted their most forbidden rituals. The air was thick with incense and a sense of foreboding that seemed to seep into the very walls. Every surface bore inscriptions and symbols, arcane signs intended to invoke awe, obedience, and, in some cases, terror. Those who entered were not merely participants. They were instruments of a system designed to reshape their understanding of power, faith, and survival. Within this chamber, initiates were subjected to ceremonies that tested the limits of their courage and their devotion. Some were tasked with actions that challenged morality itself, performing rites that blurred the boundaries between sacred duty and psychological torment. The priests orchestrated every detail, from the positioning of participants to the cadence of chants, ensuring that each movement reinforced their dominance and the inescapable authority of the gods they claimed to serve. Light was sparse, flickering from carefully positioned lamps and casting shadows that danced across the stone, creating illusions that heightened fear and manipulated perception. The chamber was a theater of control, where the spiritual and the psychological intertwined. Within its confines, the line between reality and ritual became indistinguishable, and the participants' minds were as much the object of the rites as their bodies. Punishments for hesitation or defiance were immediate and designed to instill both fear and reverence, often involving sensory deprivation, isolation, or symbolic acts of submission that left indelible marks on the psyche. The priest's mastery of human perception turned the chamber into an environment where every sound, every flicker of light, every word spoken carried weight, reinforcing the omnipresence of divine authority as interpreted by them. This was not random cruelty. It was systematic, methodical, and terrifyingly effective. The psychological impact extended far beyond the chamber's walls. Initiates carried the experience into the wider world, their actions and decisions shaped by the lessons learned under duress, their loyalty bound not by love or reason, but by fear and awe. And yet, despite the oppressive nature of the chamber, some who endured the rituals emerged with profound understanding of the mechanisms of power, insight into the manipulation of belief, and a heightened awareness of the delicate balance between obedience and defiance. The secrets of the chamber remained closely guarded, whispered in coded language, recorded in glyphs designed to confound outsiders, and deliberately erased from public records. Centuries later, fragments of texts and archaeological discoveries hint at the magnitude of what occurred, revealing a place where human endurance, fear, and faith were tested to the extreme. Now I want you to engage. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would it feel like to witness such a chamber, to stand within the shadows of absolute authority? Understanding these hidden horrors is essential, and your reflections help keep the memory of these ancient secrets alive. The lost book of secrets, hidden from the eyes of ordinary mortals, was the cornerstone of the Sumerian priests' clandestine power. Bound in materials now decayed or destroyed, its pages contained instructions for rituals so intricate and horrifying that only the most trusted acolytes could witness or enact them. These texts were not meant to be read openly. They were encoded with symbols, ciphers, and layered meanings designed to prevent misuse, conceal forbidden knowledge, and maintain the sanctity and authority of the priesthood. Each ritual described within was a calculated act, blending spiritual devotion with psychological manipulation, creating a framework in which obedience was absolute and questioning the divine mandate was unthinkable. The instructions detailed everything: the precise timing of offerings, the arrangement of participants, the recitation of chants, and the sequencing of gestures, all designed to invoke awe and fear simultaneously. Within the pages, the priests documented ceremonies involving fire, water, and shadow, harnessing elements as conduits for divine energy, but also as instruments of control. Some rituals involved initiates being subjected to extreme conditions, sensory deprivation, fasting, isolation, while others demanded symbolic acts that tested the limits of morality and loyalty. The very act of reading from the book was a ritual in itself, conferring authority upon the reader and reinforcing the hierarchical structure of the temple. The knowledge it contained was intoxicating and dangerous. One misstep could result in physical harm, social ostracism, or permanent exile from the sacred order. Over centuries, the book's contents shaped the behavior and beliefs of entire city-states, dictating the social and spiritual hierarchy, influencing rulers, citizens, and outsiders alike. Fragments discovered in archaeological sites hint at rites that involved alignment with celestial movements, invocation of deities through complex symbolic gestures, and the application of esoteric formulas that combined sacred knowledge with elements of fear and awe. These rituals were designed not only to honor the gods, but to assert the supremacy of the priests themselves, ensuring that power remained concentrated in their hands and that the populace's perception of divine will was filtered through their interpretation. Modern analysis of these surviving fragments reveals a striking pattern. Each ritual, no matter how ceremonial or symbolic, functioned as a mechanism of control, a psychological blueprint for obedience, and a reinforcement of the priesthood's monopoly on spiritual authority. The Lost Book of Secrets demonstrates that knowledge, when guarded jealously and wielded with precision, becomes a tool of power far beyond mere mortal comprehension. It shows that the Sumerian priests were not only spiritual guides but architects of influence, using sacred texts to mold perception, instill reverence, and, in some cases, instill terror. The echoes of these practices resonate through the remnants of temples and tablets, offering a chilling glimpse into how power, secrecy, and ritual intertwined to maintain an ancient order where the divine and the terrifying were inseparable, and where those who dared to learn too much risked everything. The power of spiritual manipulation was the invisible force that allowed Sumerian priests to dominate both the minds and hearts of their people. Their authority was not limited to performing rituals or delivering divine proclamations. It extended into the very perception of reality for those under their influence. Through calculated ceremonies, carefully crafted symbols, and the controlled dissemination of sacred knowledge, the priests shaped belief systems, instilling awe, obedience, and a profound dependence on their guidance. Every aspect of daily life, from the timing of harvests to the conduct of marriages, was intertwined with rituals that reinforced their supremacy, and the populace learned to associate prosperity, protection, and survival with adherence to priestly commands. The priest's mastery of psychological influence was subtle yet devastatingly effective. They understood that fear was not merely a tool for punishment, but a mechanism to ensure consistency in devotion. By creating scenarios in which the unseen consequences of defiance could be imagined as divine retribution, they induced compliance without the need for constant enforcement. Initiates and laypeople alike internalized this perception, often reporting experiences of anxiety, guilt, and heightened piety that reflected the priesthood's carefully cultivated authority. The priests also exploited the human tendency to seek meaning in patterns, aligning rituals with celestial movements, seasonal cycles, and mythic narratives, thereby creating the impression that the gods themselves sanctioned the practices. This alignment was a masterstroke. When events in the natural world seemed to confirm ritual efficacy, belief in the priesthood's power deepened, making questioning almost impossible. Beyond the public and ceremonial influence, the priests exercised control in private chambers, teaching select individuals the inner knowledge and binding them through oaths and secrecy. These apprentices carried the teachings into the broader society, perpetuating cycles of devotion, fear, and obedience that extended across generations. The priest's manipulation was not limited to overt acts. It shaped morality, social norms, and even interpersonal relationships, as citizens internalized the values and hierarchies prescribed by the sacred orders. Historical fragments and archaeological evidence reveal inscriptions, votive offerings, and architectural alignments that attest to the systematic nature of this control, showing that every ritual, every object, and every symbol served a dual purpose: to honor the divine and to maintain the priesthood's unchallenged authority. By mastering both the visible and invisible aspects of influence, the Sumerian priests created a society in which belief and behavior were inseparable, where questioning the divine hierarchy was equated with moral or existential danger, and where the very perception of reality was subtly molded to align with the priest's objectives. In this way, the manipulation of spirituality became not just a facet of religious life, but a comprehensive system of governance, ensuring that the priests remained the ultimate arbiters of power, fear, and devotion in Sumerian civilization, their reach extending far beyond the walls of the temples and into the consciousness of every individual under their watchful gaze. The curse of the observers haunted everyone who dared witness the Sumerian priests' secret rituals. These were not mere ceremonies for the public eye. They were performances of authority and terror, calculated to leave permanent marks on anyone present. Witnesses, whether acolytes, initiates, or chosen citizens, were forced to watch acts of devotion that teetered on the edge of cruelty and the incomprehensible. Every gesture, every incantation, every sacrificial act was performed with meticulous precision, ensuring that observers could neither forget nor misinterpret what they had seen. Their minds were the intended target. In the shadowed chambers, initiates would tremble as they watched sacred laws enacted with unyielding strictness, realizing that disobedience, even in thought, could result in exile, physical punishment, or spiritual condemnation. The psychological impact extended beyond fear. It became a mechanism of loyalty, creating a chain of compliance that reinforced the priest's control over communities and families. Those who observed were forced into silence, their memories burdened by secrecy and guilt, yet bound by awe at the apparent divine sanction of each act. Many were never fully reintegrated into society, carrying the trauma of knowledge that few could comprehend and none could speak aloud. The priests understood the power of perception, using the witnesses' eyes as instruments to magnify their influence. By ensuring that participants internalized the rituals as both sacred and terrifying, they created a cycle where obedience was linked to both survival and spiritual favor. The observers, despite their fear, became carriers of the priest's authority, spreading its invisible weight through communities while never revealing the full extent of what they had seen. Some were compelled to participate in the acts themselves, further entangling them in the web of secrecy and fear, while others were left to silently agonize over what they had witnessed, knowing that revelation would bring unimaginable consequences. Archaeological evidence and recovered texts hint at layers of symbolism, coded language, and ritualized suffering designed to maximize this psychological dominance. Even centuries later, traces of these practices linger in inscriptions, offering glimpses of how far the priests went to maintain absolute control over knowledge, obedience, and belief. The legacy of these observers underscores a central truth about power. It does not reside only in force or visibility, but in the ability to shape perception and instill enduring psychological influence. And now, I want you to engage. Leave a comment reflecting on what it would be like to witness such rituals, to carry the burden of secrets that could destroy your mind or soul. Your thoughts are a part of understanding the impact of these ancient horrors, connecting us to the unseen, the unspoken, and the unforgettable. The priests stood above the law, their authority cemented not by fear alone, but by the intricate interweaving of religion, politics, and social hierarchy. In Sumerian society, the sacred and the secular were inseparable, and the priests exploited this fusion to place themselves beyond reproach. Their decisions were absolute, their rituals unquestionable. Anyone who attempted to challenge them risked social exile, spiritual condemnation, or a fate worse than death. Their transgressions often used as examples to reinforce obedience in others. This impunity allowed abuses to flourish, enabling the most grotesque and secretive ceremonies to continue without scrutiny. Temples were fortified with walls, secret chambers, and labyrinthine passages that obscured the activities within, making surveillance nearly impossible and granting priests the freedom to experiment with power in ways the public could not perceive. They controlled information, determining which stories were told, which accounts of events were recorded, and which were systematically erased, ensuring that the population remained unaware of the full extent of the rituals and sacrifices. High-ranking officials, nobles, and even kings were subject to the priests' influence, their decisions subtly shaped by fear of divine displeasure or social reprisal. In many cases, entire city-states adjusted laws, customs, and policies to align with religious mandates dictated by the temple, granting priests de facto political authority. Through the careful use of omens, divinations, and proclamations interpreted as the will of the gods, the priests reinforced the perception that their power was absolute and sanctioned by divine forces. Their immunity allowed them to orchestrate increasingly complex and harrowing rituals, blending ceremonial acts with psychological manipulation, ensuring that obedience was both habitual and internalized. Ordinary citizens were coerced into compliance through a combination of ritual, superstition, and social pressure, while the privileged observed from a distance, aware that even a minor display of skepticism could provoke repercussions. Archaeological discoveries and fragmentary texts reveal a systematic approach. Temples functioned not only as centers of worship, but as mechanisms of control, where power, knowledge, and fear were concentrated in the hands of the few. The priest's ability to operate above the law demonstrates a key aspect of their enduring influence. When authority is intertwined with the sacred and accountability is absent, abuses can escalate unchecked, rituals can become more extreme, and the line between spiritual guidance and oppression can vanish entirely. It also shows that power, when insulated from oversight, becomes a tool for shaping societies according to the desires of those at the top, leaving the population both enraptured and terrorized, devoted yet controlled. The implications of this unaccountable authority resonate through the fragments that survive, offering insight into how the priests maintained dominance, orchestrated obedience, and perpetuated practices that instilled fear, reinforced hierarchy, and ensured the continuation of their secret, unchallenged rituals for generations. The rituals of blood and worship represented the apex of the Sumerian priests' ability to fuse terror with devotion. Within the sanctum of their hidden chambers, every ceremony was meticulously designed to maximize psychological impact while reinforcing the sanctity of their authority. These rites were not merely symbolic. They were immersive, engaging multiple senses and exploiting the deepest fears and hopes of participants. The air was thick with incense and the metallic tang of sacrificial offerings, while chants echoed through stone corridors in precise cadences that instilled a sense of divine omnipresence. Each action, from the placement of candles to the selection of sacrificial participants, was calibrated to convey power and to blur the boundary between the mortal and the divine. Participants, whether acolytes, chosen citizens, or high-ranking officials, were placed in roles that forced them to confront their own mortality and moral limits, often witnessing acts that challenged ethical boundaries and tested the limits of endurance. Human and animal sacrifices, carefully sequenced and symbolically charged, created a narrative of submission and obedience. They were both literal and figurative offerings, reinforcing the priesthood's control over life, death, and spiritual legitimacy. These ceremonies often coincided with astronomical events or seasonal cycles, further heightening the perception that divine forces themselves dictated the unfolding of the ritual. The priests understood that timing and environment were essential. The flickering light, the echoing chants, the solemn gestures all worked together to create an immersive experience where questioning or resisting became psychologically impossible. Beyond the participants, the effects radiated into the community. Stories of these rituals, carefully managed and often partially obscured, fostered both reverence and fear, ensuring that the populace internalized the priest's authority and the consequences of defiance. Those who were chosen to witness or take part became both carriers of tradition and cautionary examples, their experiences reinforcing the cycle of obedience and control. Archaeological remnants, fragmented inscriptions, and scattered tablets reveal patterns of repetition, hierarchies, and symbolic complexity, suggesting a highly organized system in which ritual was both a spiritual act and a tool of governance. The rituals of blood and worship illustrate that the Sumerian priesthood did not rely solely on spiritual devotion. They mastered the art of psychological orchestration, turning fear, awe, and sacred symbolism into mechanisms of enduring influence. Every chant, every gesture, and every sacrifice was calculated to embed the perception of absolute authority, ensuring that the populace, initiates, and even rulers internalize their power as divinely mandated. In this way, the priests transformed ritual into a system that was as much about social engineering and psychological dominance as it was about communion with the gods. The echoes of these ceremonies, preserved through fragmentary texts and enduring archaeological traces, offer a window into the terrifying precision with which spiritual devotion was manipulated, demonstrating that the line between sacred practice and strategic control was deliberately erased, leaving only the enduring imprint of fear, obedience, and awe. The echoes of horror from the Sumerian priests' secret rituals did not end with the ceremonies themselves. They reverberated across generations, shaping belief, obedience, and the collective memory of entire communities. Even centuries later, fragments of texts, inscriptions, and artifacts reveal the intensity and precision with which these rituals were orchestrated, demonstrating that the influence of the priests extended far beyond the temple walls. The idealized culmination of blood, incantation, and manipulation created a society in which fear and reverence were inseparable, where the unseen power of the priesthood dictated the moral, spiritual, and social frameworks of everyday life. Each ritual left an imprint on the participants, not only shaping behavior but also conditioning the perception of authority, ensuring that compliance was internalized and transmitted to successive generations. The priest's mastery over symbols, timing, and environmental cues reinforced the perception that the divine sanctioned their actions, making resistance or questioning almost impossible. Their control was systematic. No act, no gesture, no chant was left to chance. By weaving psychological influence into sacred practice, they created an enduring system of obedience that transcended mortality, with lessons of fear, devotion, and authority encoded into the culture itself. The repercussions of these practices extended into the political sphere as well, as rulers, citizens, and military leaders alike were subtly influenced by the omnipresent authority of the priesthood. Societal norms, legal structures, and even interpersonal relationships were shaped by an invisible hand, guiding behavior through ritualized reinforcement and the promise of divine favor, or the threat of divine wrath. Understanding these patterns allows us to see how the fusion of religious authority and psychological manipulation can operate on an unprecedented scale, producing conformity, devotion, and sometimes terror in ways that endure long after the rituals themselves have ceased. These insights are not just historical. They reveal the mechanisms by which belief and fear can be harnessed, the enduring power of secrecy, and the subtle ways in which authority can be maintained through perception, suggestion, and ritual. Now, as you reflect on the depth of these hidden practices, consider the broader implications. What happens when power, secrecy, and faith intertwine? What does it reveal about human nature, susceptibility, and resilience? If you've followed this journey into the shadowed halls of Sumerian ritual, leave a comment letting us know that you've reached the end and what struck you most. Hit the like button to show your engagement with these uncovered histories, and make sure you're subscribed to continue exploring the hidden, dark, and astonishing truths of ancient civilizations. There's more to discover, and your journey into the unseen corridors of history doesn't end here. There's a next story waiting that will deepen your understanding and keep you questioning everything you thought you knew.